Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures, and today we're doing another episode of a Jurassic World Evolution 2 mod spotlights. This will be part 87. So this is where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people are making and compare them to their real life fossil counterparts. So today we've got a few remasters and a few interesting animals that we get to talk about, so quite excited to get stuck into this one. So we're going to have a look. First up, we've got a remaster of an older mod. This is by Chocolate, who's actually made quite a few mods today. It's Begtse, so let's have a look at this guy. And so let's have a look at these cute little guys. Aren't they little cuties? So you can get a good one. Little one. Let's look at you over here. Now we'll have a look at this one. He's already turned, you know. Give us a nice little pose for you. So this is Begtse, or we'll get into why it's got that name. So this is a genus of Neoceratopsian, so dinosaur, from the early Cretaceous of Mongolia. And the species contains a single species, which is Begtse, Begtse, which is known from a partial skull and very fragmentary postcrania. It is actually considered the most basal Neoceratopsian known, so it's the most basal of all the later ceratopsians, so things like Triceratops, Torosaurus, Styracosaurus, Pachyrhinosaurus, all them guys. So, discovery and naming of this guy, the holotype IGM 1003652 was discovered in 2015 near the town of Tezos in the Orgonovi province of Mongolia. And described from the Ulanush Formation, the specimen is dated to be between 113 and 94 million years old at the boundary of the Lower and Upper Cretaceous. So this is about the early Cretaceous. So its name, or Beg, is named after Begtse, who's an Himalayan deity who is considered the god of war of Mongolian culture. And this deity is often depicted with like a knobbly, rugose kind of face and body, similar to appearance to the skull of the dinosaur, so it does fit quite well. So based on the size of its skull, which is about 140 millimeters, about 5 inches long, Beg was likely a medium-sized basal ceratopsian, in size of similar things like your long and Neoceratops. And very interesting as well, it shows transitional features between basal ceratopsians, so things like Psittacosaurus, Protoceratops, those guys, but also some later ones, so things like Neoceratopsians, and is a kind of phylogenetically intermediate, so it's on its way to become the later, bigger and greater ceratopsians. So that's quite cool. It's quite important to track that history, and this is a great example of that, which is quite cool. Though, as you mentioned, the skull's pretty good, but other fossil material includes a fragment which includes a rib, partial scapula, partial right ischium, and many other bone fragments that could not be identified, but we do have a pretty good idea, luckily. And in terms of its paleoecology, as we mentioned, it's from the Ulanush Formation in southern Mongolia, which is not actually that well known, but we do have sauropods, turtles, and dinosaur eggs from that formation, so hopefully you do find some more and have a bit more to say about its environment. But yeah, really, really cool. And it's recently described. It's from 2020. That's what it was described. But yeah, really, really cool animal. Definitely a big fan. So yeah, we'll let those go off. Chocolate did a great job with that. So next up, we're going to be having a look at another really cool one by Chocolate. We're going a little bit further in time. We've got Udanoceratops. Let's have a look who we got for Udanoceratops. Let's see who will come out and say hi to us. We'll have a look at this one. I like this character. I like the colours on this guy. So this is Udanoceratops, which means Udan's horned face. So these guys are a genus of large leptoceratopsid dinosaur from the late Cretaceous of Mongolia. So from the same place, but a little bit later in time, around the Campanian. So paleontologists This animal was first named by paleontologist Sergei Zhanov in 1992, and the type species is Udanoceratops dishkovani, with the holotype being collected in the 1980s from the Udanoceratops, a locality of the Djibouti Formation in the Ogoni province, which dates to about the late Campanian stage of the late Cretaceous, so about 70 million years ago or so. The name the generic name comes from where it was found, the Udanoceratops, which is a Udan and then Greek horned face, so it's the Udan horned faced, and it's best known from the holotype specimen. It represents quite a large individual and is relatively well preserved with an almost complete skull, but sparse body remains, including vertebrae. There was another large skull about a meter long assigned to Udanoceratops from the nearby Baran Mahadu Formation. However, Polish paleontologist Luskinci in 2020 put out as no referable specimens of Udanoceratops, and then it likely were confused for another animal, Protoceratops halicorhynchus, which is a different species of Protoceratops. In 2004, there was a juvenile specimen actually found in the Dodo province, which attributed the same formation, and it was published indicating that the locality actually correlates with Maastrichtian age to Barangora Formation. So it's likely this guy could have actually lived into the late Cretaceous, the Maastrichtian. That's quite cool. But yeah, Udanoceratops is quite a large ceratopsian and is the largest member of its group, which is like a group of... it's a very interesting group, the Leptoceratopsids. They're like a group of ceratopsians that were a little bit earlier but split off. They didn't develop the big horns and the big frills, but they did get to decent sizes, and they lived right up to the end of the Cretaceous. You might be familiar with one of their relatives, Leptoceratops, which lived in Hell Creek, actually. But this guy was the largest of them all. So they reached about nearly 4 meters long and weighed about 700 kilograms. And its skull, he has quite a short frill and no really big horns. And its skull was about 60 centimeters or about 600 millimeters long, with a large, robust jaws, especially that lower jaw there. You can see it's got huge jaws. So it is belonged to the member of the ceratopsiid, so it is a ceratopsian, especially a neoceratopsian. Things like Triceratops, Torosaurus, but it belongs to the family Leptoceratopsidae and is the only Asian representative of this group. So the other relatives include Leptoceratops, Montanoceratops, and Pyrenean. So they would have all been relations of this guy. In terms of paleobiology, like all ceratopsians, they were herbivores. They had short, deep jaws, would have given them a powerful bite, and it likely, like this and its relatives as well, with these large jaws, they already had a diet on tough food items, but we really don't know what really, we don't have much of what the goby plant life had to offer, so we don't know exactly what they would be eating. But what's interesting as well, the type specimen does bear an injury on its face, which is potentially caused by the biting of another Udanoceratops. So this may have been potentially for fighting, defensive or potentially sort of social, like fighting for mates or something. Some way that they communicated with each other, which is quite cool. So yeah, brilliant. Another really cool animal. Chocolate actually has done a great job and give us some really interesting animals. I'm definitely a big fan. So we'll let them run off and do their thing. I will also close the park while I do that. So keep it running, keep it running, keep it running. And our last ceratopsian, this is not done by Chocolate this time, this is done by that one glitch. We've got Einiosaurus. You know what, we'll see who's out in a good position for us to talk about. Let's see. And does it again. I hate it when it does that. I will stick with you. I think I like your position. So this is Einiosaurus. These guys are a genus of herbivorous centrosaurine centrosaurine ceratopsian dinosaur from the Upper Cretaceous or the Campanian stage of the western Montana. So its name means bison lizard. So it's a combination of two languages. The combination of Blackfeet Indian Enai, which is then a word for bison, and Sauros, which is Greek for lizard. And with the specific name Procurvicornis is because of their forward curving horn, which is in Latin. So you can see they've got that quite distinctive horn. And they're a medium-sized ceratopsian and about 4.5 meters long. So this is an animal that's only found in Montana, and all known remains of this species are currently held in the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman, Montana, with at least 15 individuals of varying ages being represented by 3 adult skulls and 100 of upper bones from 2 low-diversity or monospecific bone beds, so bone beds with only Einiosaurus. They were discovered by Jack Horner in 1985 and excavated from 1985 to 1989 in the museum by the Museum of the Rockies field crew. And actually found them. He was just kind of looking around for other fossils, and because he's a hadrosaur guy, actually just found this quarry as well. So it's quite interesting how that happened. And then it wasn't actually originally described as it was struggled to identify them as a single species. In the 1920s, they were originally kind of found as thought to be a second species of Styracosaurus, so Styracosaurus ovatus. And a lot of that had been questioned, and now there's only the type species of Styracosaurus albertensis. And yeah, looking into that, and with Horner, who discovered them to be an expert in hadrosaurs, didn't really know. I wanted to focus on the juvenile and eggs of these guys, and was not really interested in trying the taxonomy. But Peter Dogson trying to investigate and trying to look at these guys. But then Sampson in 1994, during an annual meeting of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, named this taxon B, which was originally known as a new genus of species of Einiosaurus choroficornis, which was a species name. We mentioned where it come from in life, as it was the buffalo of the Cretaceous, living in herds and having complex lives, and yeah, things like that. So the holotype itself was found in a layer of the Two Medicine Formation, which dates back to Lake Companion about 74-75 million years ago, which is his partial skull that includes a nasal horn and other parts like the supraorbital and the parietal bones. And the skull does represent an adult individual, and there's lots of different individuals, luckily, from these bone beds, so we do have a pretty good idea of what they look like throughout their lives. And some variation there, which is pretty interesting. So in terms of its size and diagnostic traits, it's herbivorous, very much like other ceratopsians, and was generally as large as a Clutosaurus, but far less robust. It was estimated to be about 4.5 meters long and weighed just over a ton, about 1.3 tons, which is pretty reasonable for centrosaurians. So it's in the well within that range. And the main trait that really distinguishes it is that nasal horn. So most ceratopsians, they go either straight up or curve forward. This one kind of curves downwards, so it goes out downwards and kind of curves really interestingly that way. We don't know exactly why. It's a very strong curve in some adult specimens. Some are stronger than others, but it's just really interesting there. And also the epicostals, I think that's what they're called, on these guys there. You can see it gives it a really distinctive, most ceratopsians are really easy to distinguish by their frills and horns. With the skeleton also being studied, but it was very conservative in terms of anatomy, so they couldn't really tell, you couldn't tell the bones were from either Einiosaurus or potentially Styracosaurus or Centrosaurus, things like that. There's very few minimum traits there. But what's really cool, the placement of Einiosaurus within this Centrosaurians was problematic due to a number of characters, and its closest relatives are the Centrosaurus and Styracosaurus, or Clutosaurus and Pachyrhinosaurus, which was kind of discussed and things like that. But the most recent cladograms suggest that it's actually very basal to the group Pachyrhinosaurini, so it is related to Clutosaurus and Pachyrhinosaurus. So in terms of its paleobiology, there's kind of low diversity in single species bone beds suggest that these guys would have lived in large herds, and these guys would have died during a catastrophic event like a flood. And there's evidence with other species such as Pachyrhinosaurus and Centrosaurus, these guys would have been herding very similar to modern day bison and wildebeest. In contrast, there's not as much evidence for the latest Triceratops like Triceratops and Torosaurus 2B, but there is fossil footprints that suggest they may have lived in herds too. And there was another really cool study that looked into how they grew up. So they grew quite quickly until their 3rd to 5th year, and that's when their growing slowed. That's likely when they became sexually mature and started having babies. And yeah, they have a very interesting, Two Medicine Formation is a very rich formation. We do have a lot of dinosaurs from there, things such as Omeisaurus, Apacrosaurus, Maiasaura, Procerolophus, Brachyceratops and Stellosaurus, the Leptosaurid Cernops, Edmontonia, Neopocephalus, the Spletosaurus, Bambiraptor, Cranices, Troodon, and Avosaurus, and these all lived in a formation together that was very seasonal, warm and semi-arid, and there's lots of like freshwater gastropods and bivalves that, luckily, the bones often they're deposited in shallow lakes, so that's very likely where things will become fossilized. And yeah, it's a great example of like the evolution there. So you can see the little, that's the one of the first Neoceratopsians, and then we got a big one here. Brilliant. So that one glitch, of course, you did that great job on them. So let them run off and do their thing. Oh, starting to mess around with these a bit too much. So again, we'll let them run off and do their thing. So next up, we've got a really cool little guy. So this is by Juserba. We're having a look at some very interesting animals. We have got Thrinaxodon. So here we've got Thrinaxodon. Really cool little guy. So Thrinaxodon is an extinct genus of cynodont, which includes the species Thrinaxodon leiorhynchus, which lived in what is now the South Africa and Antarctica during the early Jurassic. And it lived right after the Permian Triassic mass extinction event, which was the most devastating extinction event on Earth. And its survival is believed to be because of its, burrowing habits. So in terms of Thrinaxodon's like description, things like that, it was roughly the size of a fox, and it was possibly covered in hair. Its dentition suggests it was a carnivore. It did have multiple different types of teeth, like canines and incisors, things like that. Very similar to modern mammals. We are heterodonts, so we have multiple different types of teeth, unlike a lot of reptiles and things like that. They just have the same type of teeth. So these guys were carnivores, feeding on small herbivores, insects, and other invertebrates. And one of the unique adaptations they have is a secondary palate. So it actually is what we have, so we can breathe and eat at the same time. We can have something in our mouth while we're breathing, unlike a lot of other animals, actually. So that's quite cool. We also know they had a large number of foramina, or little holes on their jaws and on their lips. So it suggests they would have had a snout that actually resembled that of a lizard, or they wouldn't have mobile lips like we do, but they would have had fleshy lips, kind of like a reptile does, as they are a synapsid. So they were quite early in our family tree. They were on our way to becoming mammals, but not quite yet. Which is what a synapsid is. There's saurapsids, which include, reptiles and birds and things like that. They're a really, really cool species. As I mentioned, they've got very interesting dentition. So they have multiple. They have a dental pattern of 4 incisors, 1 canine, and 6 post canines in the upper jaw, and they have it overall about 44 to 46 teeth. So yeah, pretty interesting that way. And the histology, they do have the bone tissue consists of fibrolaminar bone, which is quite interesting as well. And they do have early, very interesting vascular canals, which is interesting as well. You're really starting to see like things that are becoming a little bit more mammal-like. Yeah, in terms of its discovery, this species was originally found in the Omeisaurus assemblage zone of the Beaufort Group in South Africa. The genoholotype was found in 1887, described by Richard Owen, and the plesiotype of Galasaurus platyceps. Then it was thought to be made a separate genus in 1894, and the type species is Thrinaxodon leiorhynchus, and the name ancient Greek, which means trident tooth, and then the species name is smooth-nosed. So it's basically the trident tooth smooth nose. And it was initially believed to be only found in Karoo, but then it was actually found in the Furwell Formation of Antarctica in 1997, and people were like, how the hell did it get there? It's in Antarctica. But then people realized, Pangaea, so they could have very easily walked from South Africa to Antarctica, when the time then the world was all one big continent of Pangaea. And there was thought about being a different species, but no, it turns out they are the same species, which is quite interesting. So in terms of their classification, the Thrinaxodon belongs to the clade Epicynodontidae, which is the greater clade of Cynodontidae, and that eventually led to the evolution of Monochleurodon and all other mammals. So it's right on the way of becoming a mammal. So this is your great, like 500,000 great-grandfather, you could say. They belong to the clade Therapsida, which is the first major clade along the line of the synapsids. And synapsids represent 2 major splitting points under the clade Amniota. So amniotes are basically animals that's not amphibians. They actually can, lay their eggs. They have hard-shelled eggs, and they can lay their eggs like either outside or give birth to live young. So it's usually under the split. So the Sauropsida includes today's reptiles and birds and crocodiles. And then Thrinaxodon is on the Synapsium. Synapsids that includes today's mammals. And this was kind of a fossily transition. And it was on the road, changes the morphology to become more like us and other living mammals. That's quite cool. And there's also a place to be, because we have so many good specimens, we know how they grow. There were different parts of their body that grew differently. Like, for example, their sagittal crest increases at a greater rate in relation to the rest of the skull, so it allows more space for muscles, of course. And they seem to likely grow very rapidly when they were young, and grew much slower to their adulthood. One interesting thing as well is their posture. So they kind of represent a transitionary posture between really sprawling gaits like lizards do, or like placosaurs, and then modern mammals that are often standing pretty much upright. So they do have interesting anatomies. They do have that sprawling like posture, and it also potentially helps with their burrowing. So we do know that they burrowed. We have lots of evidence that they did not simply steal burrows, but they lived in burrows. They have a lot of adaptations in their anatomy that suggest they use burrows, and they can comfortably rest in them, which is quite cool. And the earliest actually discovery of a burrowing Thrinaxodon is believed to be about 251 million years ago, at the time of the Permian Triassic mass extinction. And they actually dug in there, kind of burrowing together. And the first burrowing vertebrate on record is the Dinosaur, really cute little like Dinosaur. And it was possible that these burrowing patterns have passed on to future crinoids to the advantageous of being able to like burrow during the extinction, so it's like a safe area to hide. The burrows of Thrinaxodon actually two laterally sloped halves, a pattern that's only observed in burrowing no mammal Zodontia. And the change in vertebral rib anatomy that arose actually allows them greater range of flexibility, so that allows them to move around in their burrows a lot better. And there's a really cool fossil. So there's a Thrinaxid burrow that was the one in there, and then there was a large tenospondal amphibian called Brumistega that was actually found in there, and it was injured and showing signs of broken limbs, things like that, cause of the canines of another carnivore. So it's actually very interesting that potentially the Brumistega would have potentially been attacked by another animal and found refuge in the burrow while the Thrinaxodon was still in it, and then whatever happened potentially, preserve them. And so it's a really cool fossil. It's like a 1 in a million fossil. It's brilliant. Really, really cool. So yeah, I love these guys. Yasuba always does such a great job. So let's let them run off and do their thing. So next up, we've got another Yasuba mob. So we're going right from the Jurassic to up until 2003. With the first species to become extinct twice, we have got the Pyrenean Ibex. Let's have a look at these cute guys. Alright, let's have a look at you. We'll have a look at you because you've got a nice pose. I like that pose. Okay, so the Pyrenean Ibex, or Capra Pyrenea, also names as kind of brocado, things like that, are one of the 4 subspecies of the Iberian Ibex, which is a species endemic to the Pyrenees Mountains. The Pyrenean Ibex was most common in the Cataban Mountains, southern France, and in the northern Pyrenees. And the species was common during the Holocene and Upper Pleistocene, due to which their morphology can be found. They were found to be larger than other species of goat, and at the same time. So there's been multiple theories on given regarding their evolution and things like that. One possible one is they came from the Caucasia one from the Middle East at the beginning of the late glacial period, last glacial period, and then kind of diverged from there, and because they become isolated. Very interesting. But we'll talk about some of their behavior and physical characteristics. So the Pyrenean Ibex had short hair, which varied from the seasons. During the summer, its hair was short, and in winter, its hair grew long and thick, with the hair on them remaining on the males long, all the seasons. Males and females could be distinguished by color. So, in all differences, so the males were like a fadish grayish brown during the summer, and then decorated with black in several places, such as the mane, forelegs, and forehead. And in the winter, they were less colourful, with the male transforming to a greyish brown and a dull grey. With the spots worn black, he became dull and faded. But females, they actually could be mistaken for deer, as they had the same coat throughout the summer, but unlike the male ibex, they lacked the black colouring, and young ibexes were coloured like the females for their first year of life. You can see the males also had these really long, thick horns that curved outwards and backwards, then outwards and downwards, and kind of had like a really interesting curve to them. And they had ridges on them that increased with age. The ridges show their age, and the ridges are said to represent each year, so you count them up, and that's how you know how old they are. And then the females have much smaller horns, and they would feed very similar to other types of ibex on herbs and things like that. They did migrated according to seasons. So in the spring, they'd be in more elevated mountains where they'd mate, and then the females would separate from the males, and then they could give birth in isolated areas. Kids were typically born in May, usually singularly, and during the winter, the ibexes would migrate to the valley and not covered in snow. This allowed them to eat regardless of the seasons. So their habitat was once seen in parts of France and things like that, but not much as the northern areas of the Iberian Peninsula. They were found in Androna in France on the mainland, and they're believed to become extinct first on the northern tip of the Iberian Peninsula. Their population was thought to have peaked at about 50,000 individuals, and many of these populations kind of hang around there. And the last remaining Pyrenean ibex was seen in the Middle Eastern Pyrenees, about 1,200 meters above sea level. And they were sadly quite abundant up until the 14th century, and numbers did not dwindle until the mid-19th century. They tend to like living in rocky habitats and things, and they tried to avoid farmland. They did find some habitat in there, but they tried to avoid farmland. So yeah, now we'll talk about their sad extinction. So the Pyrenean ibex was one of the 4 subspecies of the ibex, Pyrenean ibex. The first subspecies to go extinct was the Portuguese ibex in 1892, and the Pyrenees was the second, with the last individual dying in 2000, so we'll get into that. In the Middle Ages, they were very abundant in these regions, but they declined quite rapidly in the 19th and 20th centuries due to hunting pressure, potentially competition with livestock and disease and things like that. By the second half of the 20th century, there was only a small population that survived in the Ordesa National Park, which is quite sad, in the Spanish Central Pyrenees. So competition with domestic and wild ungulates contributed to their extinction, believed, like they were competing with sheep and domestic goats and horses, especially in spring where there was high mountain pastures. They had a competition. They were also hunted, and potentially diseases came and wiped them out as well. And that led until the last female natural Pyrenean ibex, who was a female named Celia, was found dead on January 6th, 2000, where she had been killed by a fallen tree. And the reasons for the subspecies decline, extinction, but the Pyrenean ibex was actually the first taxon to become unextinct, and the first one to become extinct twice, in July 30th, 2003. As we'll get into, we'll talk about the story. So this is what happened. Cecilia, who was that last ibex, was captured, and then skin biopsies were taken a couple years prior, I believe. She died a year after the tissue was harvested from her ear. An American biotechnology company, Advanced Cell Technology Inc., was announced in 2000 they would try and clone her from those samples, and they used trying to clone her from nuclear transfer. It was expected to be easier than the cloning of Gar, as the reproduction, because the Gar are in danger, and they were trying to clone them with cows to help boost their numbers. They wanted to try this because we do have a good idea of the gestation or how the reproductive biology of goats. And the gestation's only 5 months, and we do have pretty good proxies and things like that. So Celia did provide suitable chances for cloning, but the main problem was, she's only a female ibex, and we only got the source from was ibex, so no males were available to produce with, so she wouldn't be able to produce pure Pyrenean ibex. And thought of crossing it with other subspecies, even talking about replacing her Y chromosome with X chromosome with a Y chromosome from another subspecies to create a male, but technology didn't exist yet. Thought about trying to get more genetic diversity, trying to sample from many other individuals, things like that. So that was very interesting as well. But there were 3 teams of scientists, 2 Spanish and 1 French, who were involved in this cloning project. One of the Spanish teams was led by Dr. Jose Fontezozona as the Center of Food Technology and Research in Aragon, and the other teams had researchers from the National Research Institute of Agriculture and Food in Madrid. So this project is coordinated by the Food and Agricultural Investigation Service of the government in Angora and things like that. And researchers took the adult stomatic cells, so these are kind of the stem cells as you hear them. So they took these tissues and fused them with the oocytes from goats that had their nuclei removed. And nuclei is all that DNA. So they would take all the DNA of the goat and then put in Celia's DNA in there, and then they'd put them in a domestic goat to act as a surrogate mother. And the first attempts failed, and out of the 285 embryos reconstructed, about 54 were transferred to 12 Ibex and Ibex goat hybrids, and only 2 survived the initial 2 months of gestation before they too died. But luckily, there was one that managed to be born. So on July 30th, 2003, one clone was born alive, but died several minutes after physical defects of the lungs. There was allostasis and an extra lobe in the left lung, but despite the setback, they kind of have taken, they've been taking research and they're still trying to create hybrids, or at least try and clone her. Cells of this organism are alive and frozen, so that's why a lot of people trying to work on, like Colossal, trying to work with mammoths and thylacines. They have to work with a lot of the very ancient DNA or very old DNA. These are like literally just cells because we collected them before they died, so this would be a very easy one to know compared to them. And this was the first attempt to revive an extinct subspecies, although the process technically began before the extinction of the subspecies. So yeah, the first subspecies, or technically first species really, to become extinct twice. So very interesting there. Yeah, another great Jacerba mod. Really, really cool. And speaking of some other cool recently extinct species, we've got Chocolate back again, who has given us the Dodo. So here we've got the Dodo. Uh-oh. See what Dodo we can find there. Okay. Here's the Dodo. I'll have a look at you. I like the posture you're in. So the Dodo, or Ralphus collicatus, these guys are an extinct flightless bird that were only found in the island of Mauritius, which is east of Madagascar in the Indian Ocean. So, very interestingly, people did not know what it was. Initially, it was thought to be a type of small ostrich, a rail, or an albatross, even a vulture. But then it was landed on that it was a type of pigeon, or ground pigeon. And then everyone was like, that's absurd, that's a pigeon. But actually, more recent evidence, looking into, especially like recently, into like 2000s, looking at the genetics, suggests that they actually are closely related to pigeons. So they are a type of pigeon. And their closest extinct relative is the Rodriguez solitaire, but their closest living relative is the Nicobar pigeon. So they're related to Victoria crown pigeons, tooth-bill pigeons, so those kind of species, which is quite cool. So the etymology of like what was called the dodo was originally called the wavogel, which means tasteless bird, pretty much. And we don't know, and other people did call it pinion, or suggest called pinion, which means small wings, flightless. But the etymology of dodo was unclear. Some thought it came from the Dutch word for door, which means sluggard or fat ass, things like that, so slow, because they were, they didn't really care about people, because they were, they weren't used to predators. But yeah, the Latin name of collicatus, which means hooded, and they originally considered a species of swan. There was Struthiococatus and things like that, but they were also given the name Ramphus, which refers to buzzards, and that's resulting in their common name. So even though there's no complete specimens of dodos known, we do know a lot about its external appearance, even though it's hard to exactly determine. We have depictions and things like that, and actually like encounters and things like that, how we reconstruct them. So subfossil bones and remnants of the species were brought to Europe about the 17th century, and they were shown to be very large birds, measuring about 62 to 75 centimeters, or about 24 to 29 inches in height. They're also quite sexually dimorphic, so males were larger and had proportionally longer beaks. And weight estimates have varied from study to study. Biggest estimates have suggested males would have been about 21 kilograms and females 17 kilograms, or 46 pounds to 37 pounds. However, this is because they were overfed captive birds that were fat. And some more recent estimations have suggested they would have been about 10 to 14 kilograms, which is interesting. So their skeleton actually differs quite a lot from other pigeons, being a lot more robust. Their bill having a hook tip. They almost look like a baby pigeon, especially with their face. If you looked at baby pigeons, they do kind of look the same. The upper bill was actually nearly twice as long as the cranium, which is short compared to those of its closest relatives, which is quite interesting. And many of the features, a lot of the features on it are either pedomorphic or look like young pigeons, or because they were flightless, so they were heavier to carry more weight and to be bigger as well. And what's very cool, we do have contemporary depictions. So most contemporary depictions are found in ship logs from the Dutch East India Company, who was exploring Mauritius. And there's actually, believe it or not, there is a really cool mural that depicts a dodo along with a lot of other birds in 1625, which is considered the most accurate depiction of a live dodo, which is quite cool. So the Indian painting was shown to be native Indian birds, and then it was shown to be a slimmer brownish bird, and is actually considered the most accurate depictions of the dodo. And that's pretty much what it looks like here. So it would look like that, like a brown, black, and like a slight blue on its lower jaw. So yeah, this is considered the accurate dodo. Chocolate did make quite a few more skins, but I picked the accurate one because this is the accurate dinosaur mod collection, and we want to have a look at the accurate one. So that's the one we picked. Or I picked. See, it's quite interesting, but there's lots of sketches and things like that. A lot of depictions as well were based on earlier images. A lot of that has been, interpretation. So the classic grey one is probably not that accurate. It's mainly just, kind of an artist's interpretation, things like that. But this bird that was in the menagerie was a live bird that lived in a menagerie in India. So it's likely this was done from a live bird. So hopefully it is, this is probably the most accurate depiction. But all other depictions you can see often are exaggerated. They make them really fat. They put them puff feathers and things like that. So the classic, grey one that we think of is not accurate at all. And the more brown, slim one is what the dodo would have looked like in life. So considering its ecology, there's not actually that much known about the dodo. Some based on waist estimates, they could have lived to about 20 to late teens, early 20s. And their legs were quite robust and strong to support their large size. Their wings were vestigial, but we all kind of knew this from anatomy. But they may have been used for display behavior, which also extant pigeons do. And unlike the Rodriguez solitaire, there's no evidence they would have used their wings in combat, as that they do have healed fractures. They had weak pectoral muscles and much reduced wings, so they wouldn't use that. And actually, their brain to body size ratio would have been pretty much the same as modern pigeons. So they pretty much is just a giant pigeon. And Mauritius actually received more rainfall and at least seasonal variation, so there likely would have been less reason to be territorial because there's more food to go around. The exact preferred habitat of the dodo is unknown, but old depictions suggest they liked dry coastal areas, but likely could have lived all across the island, which is interesting. And they liked a habitat dominated by the tablacoque and pandanus trees, also near coastal areas, but they probably lived all across the island. And there were sadly many endemic species that lived on this island, but the island is so badly damaged, the original ecosystem is so badly damaged and hard to reconstruct. There were so many different species that are severely threatened now, and a lot of extinct ones, things like the broad-billed parrot, the Mauritius blue pigeon, the Mauritius scoop owl, the shell duck that lived there. There's a night heron that lived there, also giant tortoises, giant skinks and burrowing boas that used to live there but are now extinct. And a lot of the ones that are still left are quite endangered because we'll get into that, why this guy went extinct and why a lot of the species there are doing quite bad. But according to a 1631 Dutch letter, they did suggest that they were eating like fallen fruit or raw fruit. But they would have, even though in addition to fallen fruit, they would have been eating things like nuts and seeds and bulbs and roots. Though they may have eaten crayfish and crabs and things like that. Like their relatives. So they may have been pretty, and considering they did live on ships, being transported, they seem to have a pretty general diet. So they weren't, too picky. One thing that's really cool about them as well, they seem to be rhinokinetic, so they can move parts of their beak around. And they were likely using that to eat large foods, and also had withstand a high food load, so they would have been able to crush into large things. And looking at their brain, they also seem to have a large olfactory bulb, which seems that they would be pretty good sense of smell, which is quite cool. It is not known if they do produce crop milk, but the contemporary depictions do show they have a large crop, which means they could have potentially made, crop milk. But there's another species, there's a tree, as it turns into Talapark, also called the Dodo tree, was actually thought to be only 13 specimens left, all estimated to be about 300 years old, and they actually suggested that this Dodo would have been important for their germination, because they would need to eat and germinate and poop it out. and help spread it around. Though likely it would have definitely helped it. It seems to be exaggerated, and likely they would have been distributed by other species like the giant tortoises and the fruit bats and the broad-billed parrot, which is extinct there. So yeah, it's one of those things. But yeah, in reproduction and development, they were flightless and terrestrial, and there were no mammalian predators on the islands. They did nest on the ground. And there are depictions that kind of thought, well, they would, but it's kind of, depicted. And actually, looking at, they might have been confused with cassowaries, but looking at a 2017 study looked at the histology of dodo bones and other bones and things like that to try and come up with a life history of the dodo. So based on this, seems that dodos bred around August and had to potentially fatten themselves as they have a fat to thin cycle like very many other vertebrates there. The chicks grew rapidly. They were born artificial, so that means they were very case-selective. So basically, they had few babies, but the babies were very big and well developed and ready to go, as opposed to having lots of little babies and the parents just went, okay, bye-bye. They were very much ready to go out they were artificial, so they would ride parental care, but the parents would have taken really good care of them, and they would have grown slower to be able to have that development, and the parents would take good care of them. So yeah, they would have, as I mentioned, August. The chicks grew rapidly, growing robust to almost adult sizes before the cyclone season. And adults would have actually just molted or bred molted after austral summer. And the females on the wings and tail replaced furs, and the molting would have been completed at the end of July. Things like that. So yeah, sadly they have a very interesting relationship with humans. So they were visited about the 15th century. They did visit there, and then the Dutch visit there and kind of provided the first illustrations of the bird and thinking, oh, what the heck is this thing? Da-da-da-da. And then, very interestingly as well, they were transported abroad. So the dodo was found interesting enough that a lot of them were taken and then exported to other places in menageries. So lots of zoos and menageries in Europe, and as I mentioned, the painting of the one in India was from a menagerie. So they collected and thought, oh, this is a cool bird. But whether or not a lot of them survived the journey is unknown, as the latter was destroyed in the fire. But it seems like a lot of menageries did have lots of these birds, and they live in the emperor zoos, things like that. There was one bird sent as far as Nagasaki, Japan, which is very interesting. And it was kind of a gift, they would have used because they're rare, it's a gift thing. But sadly, we'll go on about their extinction. So like many other species on Mauritius, because of introduced animals, they were fearless around humans, which means they were easy prey. Also, humans, came in and chopped down the forests and introduced invasive species like crab-eating macaques, pigs, dogs, rats, and things like that would have eaten their foods and competed for food as well. So that caused their extinction. It was also suggested that the dodo may have already been rare or localized on Mauritius, and since it would have been unlikely that it would have happened so quickly, a lot of them would have died in a flash flood. But I highly doubt that, considering, most island species, just die so quickly. It's a tale as old as time, pretty much. So they likely would have went extinct around the 1662 is kind of considered when they went extinct, though 1700 is maybe the latest. The Dutch left Mauritius in 1710, but most of those large animals would have already gone extinct by then, which is very sad. Luckily, we do have some good specimens. We do have some preserved specimens of dodos. And then we've also found some subfossil bones as well. So we do have a pretty good idea of reconstructing the dodo. Luckily, we don't have any complete ones, but we can, piece it together from all the mummified individuals we have and all the subfossil bones we have. And yeah, that could mean DNA, of course, for cloning them, as the Colossal wants to do. But yeah, the sad thing is that the legacy of the dodo is one of the best known extinct animals, up there with T-Rex and the woolly mammoth and things like that. As it's the expression "the dead as a dodo" as means something that's unquestionably obsolete or dead. So they go the way of the dodo. It's really sad because they were just an island species. They were done fine. If humans just left them alone and didn't do anything on Mauritius, they would be fine now. It's just this tale of island species. Also, dodo is a slang term for calling someone stupid because they were fearless. They just came up to people. They didn't know what a human was. They didn't have to deal with predators like that. They lost all of that predator instinct. So yeah, that's basically why they were considered stupid. But they have had a big part in culture. They've been depicted in popular fiction even before it was extinct. It was depicted in Alice in Wonderland. It was used as a mascot for Mauritius, and it's been used to talk about, help endangered species today. And there's been, yeah, things like that. So yeah, it's a very important animal in our history. But yeah, quite cool. Nice to see the dodo. And really nice to see an accurate dodo. I'm really glad he did an accurate one because it's really cool to see like how we can reconstruct this animal. Because now actually, even though it's not complete, we don't have any complete specimens. We actually do have a pretty good idea of what it looked like just because someone painted one a couple hundred years ago. So yeah, brilliant. So we'll let them run off and do their thing. Thank you, Chocolate, for that. So we've got a couple sauropods now. So next up, this is done by Trippy28. We have got Omeisaurus. Here's another brilliant one. This is easy to catch a sauropod because it's just so gigantic. Anyway, so this is Omeisaurus, which means Omei lizard. These were a genus of sauropod dinosaur from the Middle Jurassic, from about the Bathian Cavonian stage, about 168 to 161 million years ago. So they're known from what is now considered China. The name comes from the Mount Omei, where it was discovered, the Lower Saxon Formation in the Xinjiangtitan province. And it was a large, sauropod with a long neck, all that stuff. There's quite a few different species. I believe there's about 8 different species. The largest species is Theophyinensis, which measures about 18 to 20 meters long and weighed about 8.5 to 9.8 tons. But other species are much smaller, about 14 meters, and there's one that reaches 15 meters. So there's quite a bit of variation between them. So the first one was found in 1936 when Charles Lewis Camp and Yan Zhongong found it in the strata of the Xiximo Formation in China, in Xinjiang, China, with the material being taken to the Institute of Vertebrate Paleontology and Paleoanthropology in Beijing, where they found it, and it's basically some part polycranial vertebrae, and that's where it was named. And there's other discoveries. Another one in the Wujian Dam in the 1970s was another one found as well. A ship quarry found this one, which is the largest species now, which is found from there. The Tuafunensis, which is considered the largest one, was found in the Deshman quarry. And there's been more recent discoveries, and I mentioned there's been about 8 or so different species named. So when it was originally described, it was a member of the Cetosauridae, which is now considered a waste bucket taxon. So basically, it's just something that everyone just threw things into. The species sometimes was confused as Zingongosaurus, but the two are based on different material, despite having the same species name. They were formerly assigned to the group Ephalopodidae. However, it and other Jurassic sauropods that were formerly identified to that group are now placed in a separate family of Mamenchisauridae, which is considered more basal to the sauropod, Sauropoda. Though in 2021, Joe Angelo actually determined that all species of Omeisaurus, other than Myonosaurus, was valid and likely members of the same genus, with Ducinensis being the most basal. So yeah, it is closely related to things like Mamenchisaurus and Udanoceratops. So this guy would have lived in dense forests, and different species would have sometimes shared different habitats with each other, as they, being the same species, different species being bigger and smaller, things like that, would have had different niches. However, they would have lived with other sauropods and other animals such as Omeisaurus, Dinosaurus, and Dinosaurs, which lived in the Xiximo Formation, and then Mamenchisaurus was present in the Shang-Saximo Formation. Yangchengosaurus was another big theropod that probably preyed on them and potentially younger ones. There's also the smaller Juhanosaurus present. There was also another theropod called Gasosaurus in the Xinjiangtitan Formation. And then another small stegosaur that we all know, Huangosaurus, was also found. So another animal rounding out that formation. But yeah, brilliant. Really, really cool. So another nice big animal. Ooh, that's not what we wanted to do, but look at how beautiful he is. So let him run off and do his thing. And then we've got Chocolate. Thank you, Trippy, for that. So we've got Chocolate's last mod for today. So we have got another big sauropod. So we've got Xinjiangtitan. There he is, the big guy, big man on campus. Oh, no, that's not what we wanted. Yeah. Oh, no! There we are, perfect. So here he is, big boy. So this is Xinjiangtitan, or which is the extinct genus of Omeisaurus, so related to these guys in the same family. It lived in the Middle Jurassic of what is now Xinjiang in northwestern China, and is known from the type species Xinjiangtitan shazanensis, which is known from a single incomplete skeleton recovered from the Qualenti Formation, and is a very interesting animal, as we'll get into. So the type species, or the type specimen, was discovered by a joint expedition of the Jilin University, Zhejiang Normal University, and Yuzhang Geological Survey Institute in 2012, and from a quarry at about 8 kilometers south of Kuntaik in Yuzhang. In 2013, before the specimen became fully excavated, it was described as a new genus of Xinjiangtitan shashanensis, with a generic name coming from Zhejiang and from Titan, which is giant, likely, so basically the giant Zhejiang animal. And the specific name shashanensis is derived from an alternate name from the county it was found, named after the ancient Xinjiang kingdom. So that's kind of where it came from. So in terms of its fossils, it's only known from a single specimen, with the holotype comprising a nearly complete vertebral column, so basically all across there, as well as a partial skull, partial pelvis, and most of the left and hind limb. And the neck, which has all 18 vertebrae present, is nearly 15 meters long and is the longest complete neck of any animal known. So that's why it's so well known. And the vertebral column is overall about the most complete of all the sauropod specimens in India. And the cervical and dorsal vertebrae have also been described in detail. And the specimen is originally reported from the Kula Formation in the late Jurassic, but then it was from the Kaliki Formation in the middle Jurassic. So it's a little bit older than we thought. So about 160 million years old, or 165 million years old. So Xinjiangtitan, as I mentioned, is one of the longest known sauropods, so it's about 30 to 32 meters, or about 98 to 105 feet long, and weighed up to about 40 metric tons. So one of its diagnostic traits is that really, really long neck, extremely long neck. So the series of dorsal vertebrae have been about 3.72 meters, or about 12 feet long. The thigh bone is actually 1.65 meters, or 5'4", and the tibias are just about over 3 feet, under a meter long. Its long neck is about 14.9 meters, or 49 feet, so just shy of 15 meters, so making it the longest complete neck of any animal known, which is quite cool. And among sauropods, phylogenetically, it is a sister taxon to Omeisaurus, so Omeisaurus is its closest relative, and the only other Omeisaurus included. And also shares very interesting some derived characteristics similar to Diplodocus. So it's not related to Diplodocus at all, but this must have happened through convergent evolution. Things like the fourth cruciator on the femur, that is caudifemorally developed, relatively short hind limb, and a prominent abscess process on the pubis. So things like that. So interesting convergent evolution there. Be a really, really cool animal. Nice one from Chocolate. So we'll let him run off and do your thing, and I think this will be a great place to end the video. So, yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chocolate. Thank you, Glitch. Thank you, Trippy. Thank you, Jasurba. And thank you, Chocolate, again, all for making some really wonderful mods. I really enjoy, covering these mods and talking about these animals, and I wouldn't be able to do that without you guys, actually making them. So, yeah, thank you. But, yeah, I think this is a great place to end the video. So, I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Also, make it the little bell icon to get notified below anything. So, yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.